Hey everybody, welcome back to the Back to Brilliance podcast. We're your hosts Henry and Joseph. Thanks for tuning in. We ask that you subscribe, leave a comment or a review. It helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, today we're going to talk about clarity is power and the psychology behind achieving big goals. And in this episode, we're gonna talk about how only 3% of people write their goals down, and those people dominate. Because clarity creates commitment. We break down the neuroscience and the frameworks and the belief systems that high achievers use to turn desire into results. And with that, I want to bring on our co-host Joseph. Say what's up. Take it away.
Hey everybody, how's it going? So today I wanted to talk about goals because I feel like we've talked a lot about the different stuff or everything around the goals. And we've touched on goals a little bit, but, it never hurts to really dive deep into goals. And, I've been posting a lot on Twitter recently, and a lot of people have been talking about goal making or, sticking with their goals. So I was like, you know what? I'll make an episode about it. So, like Henry just said in the intro, as Brian Tracy says, which is where we're getting a lot of this information from, if you can write down your goal and if you can stick with your goal, that will propel you into realizing your goal far greater than if you don't write it down or if you don't stick to your goal.
The clearer your vision is, the more aligned you're going to be with your goals and aligned with those thoughts and actions. And, it'll start to come to fruition. A lot of it, the reason why we don't see things happen or things don't come about our way, it's because a lot of times we just like we talked about the last episode, that sometimes we're just on default mode and we just allow things to happen. So we're kind of like more reactive than proactive. So setting those goals kind of put you in a proactive setting, so that way you're setting yourself up for success.
Exactly, yeah. And the thing about success is a lot of it comes down to clarity, right? So if you're not clear about your goal, if you're not clear about how you want to achieve your goal, then you're not going to know how to achieve it, right? So, as Earl Nightingale says, and as well as Napoleon Hill, but if you have a ship and there's no directions for the ship, or if you have an airplane and there's no direction or flight path to the next airport or next destination, you're not going to make it to the destination. You might even just make it to the same airport that you're leaving from, right? So, again, a big part of clarity, or a big part of success, is clarity. And so, without that clarity, like Henry said, you're reactive. With clarity, you become deliberate. So, I could speak about that anecdotally or personally, that this whole year I've really made it my mission to write down what my goals are, even on a day-to-day basis, and I've achieved a lot more than I have in the last 2 years.
Writing down the goals really makes a huge difference. Again, a lot of times we keep our goals maybe in our head and we're like, okay, I'm going to do this. But, again, when life happens, if you're in business, you understand that sometimes things happen. So having this written down and having a clear, defined goal, it's like a GPS system. It helps you to navigate to where you want to be. You wouldn't build a house without blueprints, right? You wouldn't say, hey, I've just put a 2x4 here and a 2x4 there, and hopefully this structure stays standing, So this is kind of where clarity comes in, and putting that down on paper and setting those goals. Again, we talked about, like, there's only 3% really of the people that really create their goals and write it down. And they're the ones that are most successful. So when you look at somebody and you say, hey, how come they're so successful? Sometimes when you not sometimes, but when you speak to those people, you can see that they had a goal in mind and they accomplished that goal, and therefore it breeds success.
Yeah, exactly. And I've experienced this firsthand, or people that around me who have been successful without realizing it. It's because they wrote it down. They had it in their mind before they achieved it, right? So, there have been people in my life who I've seen who became successful, and I kind of retroactively asked myself, well, what got them there? And for the past 5 years I've known this person, well, they've been saying, I want this, I want that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, right? Versus the people who, and myself included, at some point, I didn't really write down my goals. I thought it was over valued, or I thought it was overrated, was what I was going to say. I thought it was overrated to write down your goals. But I learned the hard way that that's not overrated. That, again, only 3% of people write down their goals, and those are the people who really know what they're doing. And so, what writing down your goal does is, we talk a lot about subconscious mind, but here it is again. It it plays a role in your subconscious and your conscious mind, because if you write down your goal every day, or if you look at your goal card, like Bob Proctor talks about, that repetition and that visualization of your goal will rewire your subconscious mind to expect success.
Those principles actually work in turning your vision into a strategy, right? Like, again, we're talking about, if you flew a plane, you wouldn't fly it without a map or a GPS in these days, or building a home, you wouldn't do it without doing blueprints, So, like, the goals, they set the structure for, for the accomplishment that you're looking for. So, turning that your vision into a strategy. And a lot of times, maybe you didn't grow up doing goals. I didn't. I was never taught how to do it. You hear about it at the end of the year. What are your goals for the new year? And everybody says, oh, it's this, it's that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. The gym is probably the biggest business that takes off January 1, but by January, 31st or 30th, whatever the last day of January, when it comes time to February, the subscription isn't being renewed, because, again, they said it in their mind, they said it out loud, but they probably didn't write it down. So there's no accountability when you don't write things down.
Exactly, yeah. And so I kind of want to pivot to just, the strategy for turning a vision into a goal. And Brian Tracy has a 7-step process. But before that process, he talks about your major definite purpose, or as Napoleon Hill says, your definite chief aim, right? And so your major definite purpose is like what you're trying to shoot for, right? So whether it's, I want to build a house, or I want to buy a house, or, whatever grand goal that you have, that is your North Star, right? So mine is a little specific, or I'll give the non-specific answer, but I want financial freedom. That's my number one goal, is I want to be financially free. Now, within that, I have a lot more of a specific goal. But within that, that is my North Star. So, I write down goals that are around that, right? And so that is my major definite purpose right now, at least.
Finding that definite purpose, a lot of people call it, the why, and knowing your why and stuff like that. So, like for Joseph, he just shared it. His why is to have that financial freedom, and the financial freedom comes with other benefits, right? Which is taking back your time, doing things in your way, because, you set this plan out. So, if you don't put these goals in place and you don't do these things, then you're just pretty much, flying by the seat of your pants and just kind of like happenstance, so you can't be upset at the results, because, this is a choice that you made, right? Or I've made it too, where there's been times I didn't set goals and I didn't know when I arrived, I just, hey, one day I'm just here, it's like, oh, wow. You put your head down, you grind, and then you get there and you're like, man. So I learned from those mistakes that, like, okay, cool. I probably was there a lot sooner and could have did a lot more faster had I known, but I definitely knew what my definite purpose was. Because, for me, it was doing it for my family, right? And setting that goal to just, being successful. So, um, but in the process, I learned, and by reading and studying throughout the years now, I understand these things. Like I said, sometimes they're not taught to us in school. They're not, they might brush over it, but they don't teach you how to do it. The application. It's not just the knowledge; it's the application. So, putting these actions, or these steps in action, it's going to help you to turn that vision into a strategy.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, and that's something that I've always said. School does not teach you life skills. They just teach you the core knowledge, right? And so but that being said, Brian Tracy, his 7-step process is to decide what you want, right? Your major purpose, and then write it down, set a deadline. Now, some people will say don't write a deadline. Some say do, but just for the sake of this, we'll say set a deadline,
Mm-hmm.
and then list out the steps. And some people, depending on who you ask, they say reverse engineer it or go from bottom to top. It's all about how you want to look at it. So I'll give an example of reverse engineering it. So let's say you say, I want to make 6 figures, right? By 2030, I want to make 6 figures, right? So then you start from the top, or if you were to start from the top, then you say, okay, how do I get to $100,000? And then it's how do I achieve that? And then all of the things supporting that, right? So for me, or like some people on Twitter, they're like, oh, earning $100,000 is very simple. You sell $1,000 product to ten people, right? And that's 10K. That's 10K per month. And then okay, now I have those 10 clients. How do I get those 10 clients? And then you start going down, right? Or you go from the bottom up and you say, I want to I want to sell a product, and then that product will be X amount, and then that X amount will be blah 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 blah, right? So then you plan your sequence, right? So once you have the steps, then you need to plan out which steps you're going to take and why you're going to take it. And this is the key part. This next step is take immediate action, right? Once you have the list, once you have your sequence, don't just sit on it. Don't be like, okay, I wrote everything down. Now I'm going to sit on that for a month or two or a year, right? Do it within that week. Do it within that day, and that is where you'll really start to see the progress. And then you identify and overcome obstacles, right? So, you're only going to face those obstacles once you're out on the road, right? So if you're driving and you're like, oh, it's gonna be like the traffic is not gonna be that bad. And then you get on the road and you're like, damn, the traffic is kind of bad today, right? You're only gonna know that once you're driving your vehicle. And Brian Tracy says that this is the most practical path from idea to impact.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is just getting started, right? I think too many times we get hung up on all the steps and all the things, and it's important, decide what you want, like you said, write it down, set a deadline, because if not, you need to know what's working, what's not working. So that's kind of why a deadline helps, because if it's not serving you, you can be doing something, the right thing, for a long time, but it's going in the wrong direction, if that makes sense. So it's like, set that deadline so you can know, and then list the steps. Like, all right, these are the 3 things I'm going to work on today that are going to get me there. So if you have the deadline, like my deadlines are usually, I set them for 90 days when I start something. So if it's not working in 90 days, okay, then scrap it, right? But if it is, then you can see, okay, now what can I enhance? How can I do, and, planning the sequence, like I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then take immediate action, like you said, is very important. I would say, like, done is better than perfection, you know? So a lot of times we get hung up on, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that. So don't waste too much time. Just, plan your steps, definitely. And if you don't put this in action, then that's failing to plan, and that's a plan to fail, guaranteed, So definitely take these 7-step goals and use them as a framework, and they'll serve you, get you to that next level.
Exactly. Yeah. And so also, after you have all of that written down, it takes concentration and strategic focus, right? So once you have your blueprint in front of you, then it takes you to concentrate on your goal. And then once you're, let's say your goal is to, serve X amount of clients per month, right? And so you're concentrating on getting those clients to serve. Well, now you're building momentum. You're meeting your daily metrics for if you're trying to do a personal brand. Just speaking for myself, and so now you're building up momentum, and then that is how you can, kind of bend time, as Brian Tracy says, towards your purpose, because time goes by whenever you're grinding. Like Henry just said, he had his head down grinding. He looked back up. He's like, oh, I achieved things, maybe not in the way that he thought he would have, but again, you once you're grinding, you don't really keep track of time.
Yeah, and with me, it was just, I probably arrived there a lot sooner. I just didn't recognize it. I just thought, all right, this became the new norm. So that's what happens, So that's where the law of concentration and strategic focus keeps you going, So putting those things in place. I mean, here's an example. Have you ever read a book, super inspired? Oh my God, I'm going to implement all this in my life. Might last a week, 2 weeks, and then you go right back to your old ways. And the reason why is because we don't set those goals down. We don't write it out. We don't set the deadlines. We don't list the steps. We don't plan the sequence. It's because, we're just on to the next thing. So that's what kind of, we talked about this before, but it's our habits, right? That form our beliefs. And, that's what kind of like dictates the way you do things, So, just understanding these principles and seeing it, it's like, okay, so once you understand this and you have it written down, focusing and concentration on accomplishment, it's going to bring about those results.
Exactly, yeah. And so exactly what Henry is saying, right? There's habits, beliefs, and the resilience to win, right? So, you can have a goal, you could write it down, you can have it on paper, but it still comes down to, when the rubber meets the road, as they say. And so if you have a perfect plan, or if you have a good fleshed out plan, but you don't really put it to action, like Henry just said, that's a plan to fail. And so it takes persistence and action. That way you can achieve your success. And that's something that I've really been trying to perfect this year, is just taking action, right? I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, my goal this year is to get out of my own way. And by doing that, that means shutting up and just doing work, or just doing it, right? So I've achieved so much more this year than I have in the last 2 years, because again, this year, not only have I written down my goals and how I want to achieve them, but I've also just shut up and done the work, right? And Henry can be he could testify to that, because a lot of what we do is just me shutting up and doing the work. And obviously Henry, he contributes a lot to the podcast. But again, on my half, a lot of it is just me doing the work.
And that just comes back down to the accountability, and us writing it out. We do a lot of behind the scenes before we actually do a podcast. We meet up, a couple times during the week. just to kind of plan things out, not only for the podcast, but for the stuff that we're doing as well, for the community, for all the things that we got going on behind the scenes. So, we put it into action, and understand that success doesn't just come from setting goals only. It also comes from being the kind of person that follows through no matter what. So what does that mean? Like Joseph's saying, is like persistence, right? Being persistent in the action, and that's going to bring the success. And again, success comes in different formats, right? Like some people might look at money as the success, but it's not just the money. There's other aspects as well. You relationships, growth. All these things are success that comes about from being persistent in accomplishing your goals.
Yeah, definitely. And so again, I want to, pivot to a concept that Brian Tracy says or talks about. And I'm sure you've seen some YouTube videos or, just some content creators. They'll make a video about, if I were to start over, what would I do? And that originated, I mean, I don't know if it originated, but Brian Tracy talks about this in his book of goals. It's called zero-based thinking and course correction. So the big idea behind that is you ask yourself, what would I, or knowing what I know now, would I start this again? Right? And so really what that does is it helps you to reform and like reevaluate, how your process, how you've done things, what you would have done, what you wouldn't have done. And it just kind of helps you take inventory for how you've done things. And so that way you're constantly trying to improve your system, right? So, you're improving your system every year versus you're improving your system until it fails.
You never know what's going to bring about that reset, the change when you have to pivot. Things happen in life. You know what I'm saying? So like, you can't say like everything's going to go this way, because we never know, right? Like the housing market changes, a lot of things change, so it affects us indirectly, or directly. But when you have a little goal, little plan, a little map, you know what to do when this happens. Okay, then I'll do this or I'll do that. So it's easy to course correct, so just keep that in mind, because nothing is stays consistent forever, and we're always evolving, so my advice, and this is me, I've gone through a lot of stuff and I've seen a lot of stuff, so I learned like, okay, cool. So all these principles that we're sharing with you, whether it comes from Brian Tracy or from Napoleon Hill or wherever it comes from, it's all meant to just help you to be better and to grow into, a better individual entrepreneur, and it's all about just growth.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. And so for our last topic, I just want to point out what Brian Tracy talks about. And he says, like, your area of excellence are almost like diamonds at your feet, right? So what he means by that is whatever you're good at, whatever you love to do, that will be the engine for your success, right? So let's say you're passionate about creative media, or maybe you're passionate about music. Don't try to pick up a job in construction, right? Don't try to pick up something that is completely the opposite of what you're into. Lean into your strengths and your skills. That way you can really cultivate something that will make you successful. Sure, you can build upon your skills, right? So personally speaking, I've cultivated a lot of digital media skills, right? Editing videos, making art, just different things, right? So yes, you can cultivate skills, but I'm not trying to get into construction. I'm not trying to get into something that is opposite of what my strengths are.
As these youngsters say, stay in your lane, so but yeah, that's your zone of genius, and by enhancing your skills, it moves you into your zone of excellence, so you're able to grow and to do those things, So with that, guys, again, this is just having clarity and using it as your power. That's your superpower, by just getting that clarity. And if you're, in a place where you don't have clarity, like we said, only 3% of people really write out their goals. It may be that, you know what I mean? So it's like, write them out, put them down on paper, use it as a map. It's going to help you. The clearer your vision, the more aligned, things are going to be with your thoughts and your actions, and, the more success will come. So, like we said, clarity is 80% of success. The 3% rule, again, just write it down, and turning your vision into strategy. Again, but here's the steps. Define your major definitive purpose. The 7-step goal framework is: decide what you want, write it out, set a deadline, list the steps, plan the sequence, take immediate action, and identify and overcome the obstacles. And then use the law of concentration and strategic focus. Again, we always use acronyms, so I do. Focus is just follow one course into success, and it will come, guys. It will come, and that will help you, along to change your habits and your beliefs. Staying persistent is going to get you to where you want to be. So with that, guys, I want to ask Joseph if he has anything to add before we close it out.
Yeah, success can mean a lot of things to people, but really success is just sticking, like Henry just said, sticking to one goal and just hammering it away, right? You're not going to build a house if you're building 20 houses. That first house needs to be built. So just stick with what you have. If you realize that you're losing steam, try to find a new source of inspiration and just keep going at it. And, I want to give a shout out to our community for entrepreneurs who are tired of doing it all alone. We have a community that combines practical self-growth tools as well as community support that also has weekly structure to help you stay focused and help you follow through. So if you feel like you're losing steam, or if you want to, share your goals and have people refine it with you, or, just to put it out there, that will be at backtobrilliance.com. If you scroll down to our community section, boom, you'll be linked up with like-minded people like you.
All right, well said. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to our podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment and a review. It helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, we're out. Till the next time, stay blessed.
Bye-bye.